Hey everyone, welcome back to another Details Pro video. I am Sahan, the creator of Details Pro. In this video, I'm going to give you a guided tour of the April 25 template pack. So I've been doing these monthly SwiftUI template packs. I've been having a lot of fun. And in this video, I'm just going to go through all the widgets that are in this particular pack. I love widgets, and these designs are just very interesting, and there's little things that I want to tell you about to give you the best tools to be able to use them. So just a quick reminder, these are in the template picker, and at the moment we've already moved on to May, but from the Design Studio tab, you can hit See All on either of these template rows. And another reminder is that some of these templates are free and some of them are premium. So any of the ones with these stars are only available if you have a premium subscription. One thing that I'll recommend is if you think you might just subscribe for a little bit and then unsubscribe, grab these templates because you can always duplicate them down the road. I always say I want someone to be able to use something that was in a template pack from like the year before when they were subscribed a year later. So just make sure you're subscribed when you want to grab them, and then you can unsubscribe later, and you still have them in your library if you've already created a file with these. So with that, let's get started. We'll get started right at the top with the first one, which is Art Widget. Okay, so this one is a design that I've wanted to make as a template for a very long time because it is so simple, but I think it looks so nice. So you've got an opportunity to lay out multiple different pieces of info here with this the text. And the other interesting thing to note is just there's kind of a clean method here to get that image on there without having to mess around too much with the sizing, which is it is a background image. So you can see here I can do fit and fill. A lot of times with images in SwiftUI have a particular way of kind of growing and expanding and needing to be contained as far as with an aspect ratio or with a frame. So in this particular situation, I pulled kind of a neat trick, which is use a rectangle. Rectangle is going to fill up whatever the space is and not really be concerned about its own aspect ratio. So it perfectly fills the widget. And then there's a background image and an overlay. So just to give you an example, like kind of cool things about this, if we were to switch to a different widget size, you would see that it already kind of just plays nicely. Another thing to note, this overlay moves around with its alignment. Now, one thing I've been definitely trying to think of how to do is I'm going to pull these alignment options out and get them a little bit more visible and a little bit easier to change because I don't really like having to go down into overlay to get there. But you can see here, this is how that ends up in the corner. So a lot of cool things to learn from this, just as one particular template. But yeah, it's also a great, just a good, there's something about styling of having a small white font, uppercased and looking good. Okay, let's move on to the next free template in this pack, and that would be Navigation to Museum widget. Okay, this widget, the design here that I wanted to share is really all about those two panels, the upper panel and the lower panel. There's some interesting things happening here. For example, this symbol has got, its horizontal padding to take up that nice space and have that weighting. And there's just some other things with like the primary and secondary colors here. There's a little bit of parallelism with how they both have, some major visual and then a primary line, a secondary line. There is also a small divider line right here that you could remove if you want it to be a little bit more clean. But yeah, this is something maybe if you've got like something that's an activity or something that has a couple of choices, you could split it into a top and a bottom. And yeah, overall pretty clean. This would also work, I think, well without an image. It doesn't really need to have a photo. So could be something good that you could use in one of your designs. All right, let's move on to the next one, which is Museum Hours widget. Okay, this one is really all about one thing. I'm going to make this a little bigger in the video. This is all about having, just text and actually a lot of information. So if we go into, let me just put it back to its fit size. This widget is really showing a ton of things. There's a primary title, right, for the museum. There's already information just encoded in the color and this small thing about, hey, it's open right now. So You could do all sorts of things with like an order, and you could say, the name of the product that was ordered and the shipping status, or, the coffee someone ordered and what state it's in, stuff like that. And then the other crazy thing is these rows down here that show the other days and their times. I just thought this was an interesting way to communicate, again, more with less, because you can see that certain days are closed. And there's a hint with that being the case, thanks to, I believe, that is like a tertiary color. Yeah. Tertiary is the color for those, and this one is secondary, which I think is the default, or it was added on there somewhere. We'll come back to that. Yeah, color. Nice. So there's lots of ways to customize what you get in these repeats and in these widgets. And I think this is just a great example for, again, text only and lots of information in a small space. Okay, with that, let's move on to the first of the premium widgets. Now, this is going to be museum tour widget. Is that 100%? There we go. Okay, so this one is super cool. I think I was just imagining that, maybe you're at a museum and you're walking around and you're doing the audio tour, and you'd have a widget that is telling you, which track you're on in the tour. So which piece am I looking at, and can I pause it and skip to the next one or rewind? I think the cool thing about this, we've definitely seen a lot of music widgets, and there's designs for that. It's just interesting looking at a situation where you would have a current piece of audio and maybe a graphic. I think, again, this could work in a lot of situations. It could work in a recipe app where you've got your current step and you've got some sort of graphic with that, or any sort of instructional thing where there is a piece of media that is like an image or a video, or maybe something that the user has created themselves, and there is a traditional kind of play, pause, previous, next music block. This is a pretty simple design. It's an H stack. It's got the image. It's got a vertical stack for all of this content, and really easy layout with a lot of this stuff. One thing to note, I do think just in designs that I've studied in the past, you don't really realize it, but this play pause icon is normally bigger than the other ones. You don't really realize it until you get into trying to make one. So definitely play around with that, and that's pretty cool. Okay, let's move on to featured works widget. Okay, so this whole set of these three is a very, I think, super common, very nice, very generic template. So again, we've got that primary, secondary pair at the top, but this could be so good for anything like photo albums or any sort of notification or status or content update that has multiple pieces of media. So this is a repeat inside of a grid. So you can also play around with, if you truly had more stuff to fit into this widget, you could. And then I think there's an aspect ratio on these. There is, and you could change to, square. Kind of knocks it out a little bit, so we'd have to adjust that. But maybe it's something with someone's favorite TV shows or episodes or something. It's just a super clean look, and it's, I don't know, just really flexible. I love stuff like this, and you still can really communicate quite a bit up there. Now, the next one, we'll kind of switch that into a list. So we've got featured works, which had the grid. Now we've got it in list form. So what's the big difference here? There's kind of a trade-off. So in the past one, we had room for a subtitle. That's gone here. But instead of just having the images, we have room to put title, subtitle on each one of those images. So if you have content that is not only listed, but also has smaller pieces of information. For example, this could be like recent orders to your shop. What's the product? What is the order amount? Something like that. Could also be, friends listening to music, maybe a photo of the friend, and what's, the last track they played, stuff like that. This is a really interesting widget. It's just, again, very generic, very common, and I think very flexible as a result. Just kind of a good one to have in your library. After that, we have one that flips this one around a little bit. So this is making that into a checklist. And I was imagining, maybe you're walking around the museum and you want to keep track of the artworks that you were planning on seeing. How would we do that in a widget? It'd be really nice to have that on the home screen. This one's interesting. So the trade-offs are not too far off from this last one. The major ones are All the lines of text are limited to just one line. So I think if we go here, yeah, we got that line limit widget or modifier on there. Then the other thing is the images are a little smaller, but they do make room for that checkbox on the left. So it's kind of interesting what you can squeeze out. Again, this is a small space. It's just the box of a widget, but we can go from something that kind of looks like a browse or more of just an exploring of a library to something that is more interactive and more actionable. And you still get quite a lot of info, even though you can't read the whole stacks of wheat end of summer on that first one. You still get stacks of wheat end of. I mean, you know what I mean? It's pretty good. That is a lot of info, and will still be readable even though it's cut off. So if you haven't experimented with line limit, that might be something that could really clean up your designs really quickly and easily. Okay, let's move on to our final template here. Okay, this one is quite the interesting challenge. So this is for the extra large widget size. If you're not familiar, on the larger iPads, I think it's the only place you can get to these, there is a widget size that is larger than large. So where, I'm just gonna mess this one up for a second, where you have the medium and the large, extra large gets way wider. So this is, I always talk about iPad designs being harder to do. I think any design where the space gets larger and larger, you definitely have to think about it a little more. So in this situation, I wanted to show an example of truly how much information you could pack in an extra large widget. So just going through this really quick, very clearly, we've got a whole paragraph of text, which is wild because I'm not sure that this whole paragraph would even really fit in here without taking up all the room that's in there. Alongside that paragraph, we have room for a large image. You know, this is not really small by any stretch, and I think the way I've got it set up could even get a lot bigger. I think there's a spacer in there that we might get rid of here. But let's say we wanted to make this bigger until that kind of filled that up. Okay, great. So you have all this room to show quite a visible window into an image. And on top of that, you still have room for a classic horizontal stack of an image and a title and a subtitle. So this is just kind of a wild amount of information. I thought this would be a good example to show, maybe for a reference material, maybe you're working on something like the Wikipedia app or, word of the day or something. You could truly show like the definition for the word and multiple uses and an AI generated image showing what that word means or, anything like that. Extra large is something that you might not encounter as often, but good to have something that just kind of demonstrates. Or, you could even do something like this. You could take what you find in this widget size and move that into your app as rows. If you have an iPad app, maybe you make some sort of list view and you've got these huge cards for jumping off into big parts of your app. Truly, there's a lot of things you could do with that. But with that was the April 25 template pack. So I had a lot of fun with this one. If you see, April was widgets. The big thing for May was login screens. I've already made another video on this YouTube channel for that. So if you'd like to check that out, you know where to find it. And if you have any requests for future template packs, please let me know. I would love to incorporate requests. I'll be doing these monthly, and I'll also be dropping in some as interesting things pop up in the design world. So thank you again for watching, and can't wait to talk to you soon.